Hey, what's going on, everybody? Special guest here. It's Brian Christopherson, covers Nebraska for Husker247 in the 24/7 Sports Network. Here to talk about new Miami transfer running back Ajay Allen. Brian, let's talk about last season for Ajay. We'll get into his skill set, how he was as a high school recruit, a prospect, things like that. But can you just kind of summarize his season last year, his first season, his lone season at Nebraska?
Yeah, you almost want to go back to his recruitment because there's a specific coach who was pretty instrumental in getting him to Nebraska. Brian Applewhite was the running backs coach at Nebraska, who was hired by Scott Frost basically in January of last year. And AJ Allen and Applewhite were tight. AJ was connected to him committed to TCU when Applewhite had been a coach there. And I think kind of wanted to follow Brian Applewhite to Nebraska. So AJ Allen became a late recruit in the cycle for the Huskers last year. And it became evident very soon after he got here in the summer. That's important to note, too. He wasn't an early enrollee, but he got here in the summer. And still by the opening game when they were playing out in Dublin, Ireland against Northwestern, he was like one of the top two backs. So in 2 or 3 months, he was able to work his way near the top of the depth chart last season. And then really promising start, 190 yards. People can look all that up on 33 carries or whatever it was, but he ran bigger than his measurements. Like he's listed at 5'11", 185, and Husker fans were pretty optimistic about him because he seemed like a guy with some thump, like he could get those extra yards. And right when we were about to find out if he was actually that guy we thought he might be, he hurt his collarbone against Oklahoma before the Big Ten season, where you get to see like what he's all about against sort of the grind and league play. So that was a disappointing part, no fault of his own, obviously. Just an injury kind of derailed all the momentum that seemed to be building in September.
You mentioned the extra thump. Immediately, I go to Miami, new running backs coach Tim Harris Jr. I asked him in the spring about what he's looking for in a running back, because Miami currently has different skill sets with its running backs, big guys, small guys. And he said the number one thing he's looking for is essentially that thump, that extra yards, whatever it might be, however big you are, you've got to get those extra yards. With AJ, those 4 games that he did have, the OU game obviously is when he goes down, but he does get, over 40 yards in that one. Obviously, OU's tough competition. Was there anything in that game in particular that made you feel like maybe AJ's going to have one of these seasons? You touched on what he did already in the summer, but that he was, essentially en route to having a really good freshman year.
I think the fairest way to say it is at the moment he got injured was also right before that was, I think there was a feeling developing even in that game, like he might be the guy emerging as RB1 at Nebraska. Like Anthony Grant, who will be familiar to people down in Florida because he played at Florida State for a while. He was the top running back, and I'm not saying he would have just got pushed to the side, but there was no question, like in the first half of the OU game, and when you look at the previous 2 games where AJ played well against Georgia Southern and North Dakota, it felt like momentum was on his side sort of to maybe be the top guy, if not the co-top guy. So that's where he was when he got injured. I don't want to go too far with it. I would say like even before he transferred, and I'm not trying to pour cold water on him at all because I think he's a really good talent. It was sort of like, okay, we're pretty excited about what he can be, but there was still a little bit of mystery about him, because we had only seen so much of him. I think he only played, if you look at his actual offensive snap count, it was probably 70-some snaps. But if you go back to his high school career in his senior year, I thought he was an underrated prospect. I mean, he had more than 2,200 yards as a senior in high school. And he's got some explosiveness, too, when he gets in the open field where you feel like he can accelerate and run away from some people. So it's that nice combo. On the surface, it looks really good. I do think people should be excited that he's there.
Before we get more into the skill set stuff, the things you're touching on there, and obviously his high school stuff, I want to get into that, what you noticed there. But, one thing that stands out to me, what you said earlier about him coming in the summer, we see this at Miami all the time. guys that essentially are late arrivals, essentially late in this day and age in college football. If you're not there in the spring, it's just tough to crack the rotation for the season. What does it really say about him that he was able to essentially grasp and earn the trust from the coaching staff just in those few months last summer to essentially earning a role early on in the season? Was there anything intangible that essentially made him more ready than others, or was there anything that he was doing in particular in addition to his skill set?
Well, the last coaching staff really thought of him as a very quick study. And even in his first game, which they played out in Ireland, I remember Brian Applewhite, then running backs coach, was saying, well, a lot of people are going to be impressed by this like 8 or 10 yard run he had where he got some extra yards. What really impresses me is how on the ball for a first year player he was with some of the pass game stuff, like pass game pro, and, like really just being a student of those detailed items that you have to separate yourself from the college game. You could say that running backs are a dime a dozen of guys who can go get 3-4 yards here, but do you have that extra stuff where you can hold up in the passing game and you're a guy they don't have to take off the field and you're just a niche player? And it seemed like early on, at least from what we were hearing, AJ had those capabilities. And then, of course, Nebraska changed coaching staffs. And, there's a lot of good running backs in Nebraska's room. It's a room that's like 4 or 5 deep right now where they feel very strongly about it. So, I think AJ was just sort of lost in that mix a little bit. And he might have even had a shot to emerge still, but obviously wanted a fresh opportunity somewhere else. And that sort of stuff happens when there's coaching changes, of course.
So Miami's current, with AJ's addition, they had 3 scholarship running backs in the spring. AJ becomes the 4th. They're still waiting on 2 other freshmen to arrive. So Miami, as it stands, going to go into the 2023 season with 6 running backs. We touched on his skill set. I know you've touched on that. 5'11", 185. Just how would you assess his speed, agility, in addition to his hands? How would you kind of just assess his overall abilities? For people that haven't seen him play even once, how would you describe him to people?
I think he's got good hands from what we were told and saw in glimpses. It seems like a guy who can catch it out of the backfield, make something happen there. I mean, you have to be that complete guy to play anymore in football at that position. And he did show, I think that if you look at his high school, I mean, those are the huddle highlights. So every guy looks good on there. But you do see that he can run away from people. There's no doubt about that. But I keep going back to and then what I really wish we would have saw last year was get the chance to see him play in the Big Ten, because, people can knock the Big Ten here or there, but it is a tough league to get yards between the tackles. And if you are that guy who can, I think, take a 2-yard gain and make it a 4-yard gain, that's the guy I want. And I thought AJ might have that potential. So if I'm a Miami fan, that's what I'm excited about. Yes, I do think he has some home run hitting ability, but the more I watch this game and the way it plays out, and these, there's small margin for error in college football, the more I want that running back who can get me that 1 or 2 extra yards every play, keep you kind of ahead of the sticks, keep you on 3rd and 3 or whatever. And I think there's possibility for AJ with that. I'm hopeful for him. I think Nebraska fans were disappointed when he left, which always says something, because sometimes a guy goes in the portal and it's like, whatever. It wasn't like that around here. People realize there's some depth in the room, and it wasn't like a panic about it. But there's no question that there were a lot of people who were pretty fired up about seeing what he could do after last season. And I'll go as far as this. Like last December, I remember going on the radio around here a lot, and there were conversations like, who are the top guys that you don't want to see leave with the new coaching staff? And Ajay Allen was always a guy near the top of that conversation. So he was well thought of here.
Certainly, and certainly Miami fans should be excited about his potential. You touched on his big play potential. In high school, he earned that nickname Quick Six because of what he did there at Neville High School in Louisiana. Over 2,200 yards, 34 touchdowns as a senior. You said you liked him, even more than the rankings. 247 Sports had him as the number 25 running back in the country, a 4-star recruit, but the composite rankings had him much lower, a 3-star, right around number 40. What did you see from him in high school? What did you like? And maybe what do you remember that the coaches liked from what they saw, getting him out of Louisiana?
Yeah, and I first off, I want to say like those guys who do the rankings, they see so much more than I do. So it's, I mean, I'm not to say they didn't have him right. I just thought once he got to Lincoln and you started to see him against college competition, I was like, okay, that's a guy who he belongs. Like you just know that. And so and I think when you look at his his numbers as a senior in high school, he was one of those players you start to ponder like why didn't he have a little more attention, from people. But I think, I give a lot of credit to a former Husker assistant, Brian Applewhite. With him, they had a very deep bond. And I know that AJ was planning on going to TCU, and then they had a coaching change there, which is why Applewhite ended up at Nebraska. And there was an emotional connection between those two when Applewhite got the Nebraska job, about basically like, hey, come join me here. Let's do something special. So, he's going to have to do it now with a different coach and all that stuff. But yeah, I liked everything I heard about him from Applewhite, who was just a huge, huge fan of him. And I think really thought of him as a guy who was maybe special beyond what some rankings had him.
Brian, this was excellent information. I knew you would deliver it. We talked about this before we started. I appreciate you dropping the knowledge. Your time is valuable. I'll let you get back to it, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.